This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Thanks for selling your car to Carvana. Here's your check.
Whoa, when did I get here?
What do you mean?
I swear it was just moments ago that I accepted a great offer from Carvana online. I must have time traveled to the future.
It was just moments ago. We do same-day pickup. Here's your check for that great offer.
It is the future.
It's the present and just the convenience of Carvana. Sorry to blow your mind.
It's all good. Happens all the time.
Sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times may vary and fees may apply.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome to the Shabby Detective, yet another Columbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me, of course, is Mr. Chris Dashew.
You know what? It was my idea. Idiot wrote it down. God damn it.
We are talking about the third episode of Columbo, the first in the official season, Murder by the Book. It came out September 15th, 1971. Written by Stephen Bochco, based on a story idea, I believe, by Lincoln Levinson, and directed by a guy named, is it Steven Spielberg.
I thought he went by his middle name, Alan Spielberg.
Get me Steven Spielberg.
He's unavailable.
Then get me his non-union Mexican equivalent. Listen, Senor Spielbergo, I want you to do for me what Spielberg did for Oscar Schindler.
Schindler es bueno. Senor Burns es el diablo.
And we have Martin Milner as Jim Ferris and Jack Cassidy as Ken Franklin. They are a writing team, Franklin and Ferris, kind of like Levinson and Link. And I don't know if it was that pushed it over, but this was actually supposed to be the second episode of the season after Death Lends a Hand, which we will talk about next month. But it was either between, isn't this funny that we have this writing duo, or this Spielberg kid is pretty amazing. We're going to pull this up and have this be our premiere episode. So we are yet again, Chris, talking about the first episode of Columbo.
I was about to say that this show should be called The Shabby Detective: Failure to Launch. Yeah, because you've said like this is the third episode of the show, but it's also technically the first episode of the show. What's funny is if this is the first episode of the show that you've seen, boy, what it's almost perfect. It's practically a perfect, it's a movie. It is a film. It's feature length. It's perfect. I don't know what else, just at the outset, this is one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen.
Wow.
Isn't it? Is it not?
It so is.
It's pretty damn good.
I am so excited to hear you talk about this. This is great.
This is really good. I think if you want me to give my thought on what pushed it into the first slot, it's the tongue-in-cheek nature of it being a duo of the writers. I think that's it. Lincoln Levinson were like, isn't this funny? And it is funny. It's a murder story taking place between two mystery novelists with a mystery, one of the most important, if not the preeminent, like fictional detective TV one at least. And it's just, I don't know, everything about it is just kind of perfect. I don't know. It also helps. I've been reading a lot of mystery novels this year. Like I've said before, like I'm reading a book a week. I have read more mystery novels than anything else. So Cadfael and Dick Francis books and like Agatha Christie and Robert S. Parker, like stuff like that. So this is like already in there, but then it's like, oh no, we're going to actually have there be a mystery novel angle. And then he's kind of like telling him about it too. This was perfect. I'm telling you. So good. What about you, Mike?
This ranks up there for me as one of the best Columbo episodes. Jack Cassidy, who you're going to see 2 more times, one of Columbo's best villains. I love Martin Milner. He's only in this for a little bit. I mostly grew up with him on Adam 12 and a little bit on Route 66. I didn't realize how diverse of an actor he was until I got older and saw him in other things. I really like him as the kind of more straight-laced partner and also the guy who is actually doing all the writing and coming up with all those great ideas, and the other guy's taking all the credit and cashing all the checks and really spending money that he can't spend. He's got the lavish apartment. He's got the beach house. And I really like their chemistry, and I really like, sometimes it's like, okay, would you hurry up? Would you get to Columbo? Would you get to Columbo? But it's like, no, I am so invested in these two guys as this murder is being set up. And especially when Milner's in the car being driven down to the cabin and he's like, I've got deja vu. He can't remember that he wrote down the idea that his partner had and that this is all part of that plot that they had before.
Which I did not notice until I watched it the second time. And I was like, why is he saying the thing? Oh, right. Because even he doesn't remember you're in one of your, you stole my story. Like, you're in one of your own stories.
Do you like murder mysteries? Because you're in one.
You're in one. Yeah, it's Pirates of the Caribbean. Jesus. It's really funny, though, because like you said, you open this episode with no Columbo, as usual. Again, at this point, you're not getting Columbo for, it would vary. It seems to vary, but he doesn't come in until at least halfway through the first act, it would seem. And like you said, I don't miss him at all. Jack Cassidy is just so damn charming as the villain, and he's such a bastard, just such a smug. That's the thing. The other villains have been smug. We've had Lee Grant and Gene Barry. I like both of them, but Jack Cassidy, there's just something about him where he's just like so fucking smug. It's the level of smug that I can get behind it, because you get the sense early on, he's, you hear the typing and he's, this intro with the typing is fantastic on top of everything. Spielberg, that kid's going places.
Shot through that window looking at his car coming up. I love that they're following his car, pulling back. You're inside the office. Oh, here's the guy who we're hearing typing, and he's typing out the end of this murder mystery. I love it.
The thing about this that obviously Spielberg brings in Aces is style and confidence behind the camera. Like we kind of mentioned already with the Lee Grant? The Lee Grant one has some kind of interesting stuff as well. The first episode, not so much. The first, Prescription Murder was a little bit kind of more straightforward, but Ransom for a Dead Man had some other kind of interesting things going on. And then when you get to this, it's like you said, the typewriter thing at the beginning, that's very stylistic. The other two don't have anything like it. Even that first opening scene.
I love when he's about to kill Lily Lasanka and you follow the bottle and it's like this handheld shot of him walking with that bottle. And then when he goes to kill her, how the sound cuts out when she screams. That's nice.
Don't go into the pantry. There's an infusion of style from Spielberg that I'm not saying the other two didn't bring it, but Richard Irving in his other two movies or episodes, however you want to look at them, they were very straightforward. And Spielberg, look, this is what Spielberg's one of his first things, his first TV thing, right?
Well, he had done that episode Eyes, and he had done a few other things. And actually, later on in this episode, we're going to have an interview with Joseph McBride, who wrote a whole book about Steven Spielberg. That'll be coming up for the listeners at home so they can hear all about Spielberg's early career, and especially how some of the things that he worked on in his early days informed what he worked on in his latter days, including the movie that he's got. I think it might be either in the can or coming out pretty darn soon, The Fabelmans. So it's a pretty great interview. I mean, he's up there with Mark Dawidziak as far as just being a raconteur.
Ask him one question and he can talk. Nothing wrong with that. Hey, it makes our jobs easier. Don't even have to ask any questions. This is the last thing Spielberg does for TV before Duel.
Pretty much, I think he has credited getting Duel based upon this, and Levinson and Link really dug the kid. They were just like, yeah, this guy knows what's going on.
They had an eye for writing, and they clearly had an eye for directors as well. Hey, Spielberg, right? Well, who is bigger than Spielberg
right now?
Well, I think in general, isn't Spielberg is the most financially successful director of all time.
Gosh, I think if you look at the top movies, other than maybe James Cameron, you're going to get a lot of Spielberg titles out there. And just as far as like best of lists,
just to be the guy who makes Jaws or Close Encounter. I mean, it's like anything else. We've talked about this when we talk about John Williams, like to just have the Indiana Jones theme or the Star Wars theme to your credit is one thing, but to have that and Harry Potter and Superman and da-da-da-da, it's like, Spielberg is the same. It's like, how many more iconic things can you make? At this point, it's seemingly slowed down, but that's okay. His style was suited for a very specific time, not like the film Always. But the other person we haven't mentioned, you already kind of mentioned his name, Stephen Bochco. My God. I would say more of the credit should go to him than anything else, because this zips along. There's no unwasted momentum in this. Unlike the last two, which did admittedly drag, and yeah, they're like 20 minutes longer, so more a quote-unquote feature, they still drag. I think you could have given this one 10 more minutes and it probably would have been fine. Frankly, if you had given me a little bit more of the relationship between the proprietor of the store that gets murdered with the champagne bottle and Jack Cassidy, I think you could have, would have been something to be mined there. Like one or two more scenes between them, as opposed to her just like coming out of the woodwork 3/4 of the way through.
I don't know if Bochco was as big when you were growing up, but for me, he was everywhere, and just things like NYPD Blue, LA Law, Murder One, Doogie Howser he was behind, the ill-fated Cop Rock, which people still talk about to this day, Hill Street Blues, which to me, TV was sophisticated and TV did its thing, but Hill Street Blues really kind of pushed it to a different level for me. And I think a lot of the premiere television that we have today, a lot of that goes back to something like Hill Street Blues. People might say that that's crazy, but I really see Hill Street Blues as being a sea change to what television could do.
Everybody always talks about a show that's very near and dear to my heart now became so very quickly The Sopranos, right? The Sopranos changed television. And I think The Sopranos changed television for when it was, but I would be inclined to agree with you because from everything I've read about Steve Bochco, never watched a single episode of Hill Street Blues. Unfortunately, I have a couple friends that really enjoy it. It would seem everything I've read and looked at of his, I would be inclined to agree with you. And again, when you have as many credits to his name as he does, that are all quality, God, like you said, Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue alone. And then you add Doogie Howser and LA Law and Capital Critters.
Can't forget that, man.
Which sounds like a show of bona fide insanity about cockroaches and rats that live in the basement in Washington, D.C. of government buildings. Man, whatever.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I'm here for it. But his writing in this is really good. And I keep having to remind myself that these aren't based off of books. When I watch Perry Mason, it's like, I know the Perry Mason character is based on the book character, but not necessarily, not every case in that show is based off of a case from the books. Because Earl Stanley Gardner was a very prolific writer. I want to say he's got like 80-something probably books. I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but fairly prolific writer. So there were more episodes of the show than there ever were books. With this, I constantly have to keep reminding myself that this isn't based on a literary character, but it feels so well developed already. Even with the amount of time that Columbo's around, which is, like we said, admittedly, he's not really the main character of his own show. It's weird that he is so already well developed in my mind, and it's not weird when I think about Link and Levinson. And then someone like them going, someone like Bochco going, this is how I'm going to interpret what you've already given me. It has already set the character in an interesting direction, but he feels so literary. So literary.
Well, and it's nice that they're playing with this author team, as you mentioned, and that they have this character, Ms. Melville, who I think is very Ms. Marple-esque.
Right.
So
I would
really
assume,
playing against the whole drawing room, Agatha Christie, just all of those tropes that Christie trucked in, and that Lincoln Levinson were admittedly fans of. But having that and just this whole idea of, it was very nice when we get to see the book that Franklin had autographed for Lasanka, that it was a book called Miss Melville in Prescription Murder. So, that's good.
Very, very tongue-in-cheek. Very tongue-in-cheek. It's great, though. And like you said, there are enough kind of twists. I would say of the plot so far, this one is the least complicated of the three. I have the body. I'm going to dump the body. That's it. And then I have to kill this woman because she ends up, making a problem of herself. But it didn't have the thing that the last one did where there was like intrigue with another character. This seemed pretty straightforward. But I think, again, it works to the benefit of the episode because there were people who started watching the show at this episode. We've seen Columbo introduced 3 times now, right? Let's just get that out there. Realistically, we've seen 3 iterations of Columbo. This is the one that I've liked the most, and I'm sure you're going to tell me this is the one closest to, if not essentially, what you're going to get from here on out.
Yeah, you're going to get a few more of the trappings. I think possibly in the next one, you're going to get the car. I don't remember when Dog shows up, but Dog is not always there, which is kind of good. His cigar kind of comes and goes kind of thing, but
I love this cigar.
Yeah, he's there with the questions, and he's already just like, oh, there's just one thing that bothers me. And I love, how fucking smarmy Jack Cassidy is, where he's just like, I'm so disappointed in you, Lieutenant, and just constantly berating him for not thinking outside the box. Come on. Of course. And he thinks he's so smart. Oh,
so
man.
So fucking smart.
Look at this little troll that walked in here. I am going to talk circles around this guy, and he's not going to know up from down.
Now you're thinking like her, Columbo. Let me give you some of these books so you can start thinking like our detective.
He piles them up with books, and then Columbo comes back, the next day? He's like, I read through all those books.
and that's the thing, though. Like, just when you think you're smarter, in the door walks Columbo. And that's when you know it's all over. Like, it's already over. The moment Columbo walked in the room, he already knows. He knows. He's just trying to figure out how.
Why didn't you take a plane up to here? Oh, your mail was opened? Just all those things. He just, boom, fucking laser focused.
My favorite one in the entire episode was, so tell me something. Is there any nightlife here? Oh, no, just sleeping crickets. Well, see, here's the thing. I called your house last night, and nobody answered. Just, completely ends. It just, Jack Cassidy, up until the moment Columbo reveals the note, that Jack Cassidy, in his mind, still has him beat. And that is just such good writing. Is, letting that villain go all the way up until the final moment. And then stick him. Which is Columbo has been doing that now. This is the 3rd time it's done it. And I like it. I really like that it's we're going to bring it essentially to the last minute of the episode. We're going to use every single moment of the episode. And then it's just Columbo walks out the door and that's it.
Back to where he came from, where we don't know. He just shows up and then he goes away. And I like how he's in the hallway with the soon-to-be widow. And, you know, she's already a widow. She just doesn't know it yet. She thinks it's a missing persons case. But he's there. The homicide detective is there. And he takes pity upon her and basically takes her away from the scene in order to pump her for information and to make her an omelet.
What the fuck?
And what is this? The secret to a good omelet is no eggs, just milk.
All milk.
What?
Yeah. Very, very Columbo with very tongue-in-cheek.
Mm-hmm.
He's, you know, Peter Falk, I mean, what is there to say, right?
Can you tell he's having the time of his life, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's, you know, that is the thing when we watch these, like, you know, because we do a Barney Miller show and we've done a Kolchak show as well. I can tell in these shows in the 70s, like, these actors are having a good time. They're having so much fun doing acting in television in the 70s, which must have been a complete nightmare. And from everything we've heard, it completely was, given Peter Falk not wanting to work in network television, given the thing with Danny Arnold and working until 4 a.m. on Barney Miller. Like, these were not the kinds of environments that someone who's not a workaholic wouldn't want to be a part of. But the people that are here are, like, so devoted to it. And you can just tell, like, everybody is bringing their A game here. And I know it's not going to be like that throughout the entire run of the show. But right now, in this first episode, try number 3, it's just so good. Even someone like you said, Martin Milner, who doesn't really have anything to do, really.
And I love Barbara Colby as Lily Lasanka. I love when she shows up, especially at the beginning, and how hard she's flirting with Franklin. And then, yeah, you said how she kind of pops out. It's just like, oh, I happen to know a little thing. I just love all of that stuff that she's doing with him. This is the first time where we get the second murder. And you're going to see this a few more times as we go along, which is, and it's kind of like Columbo says, the first one is so thought out. The second one is a crime of necessity, and it's always super sloppy. And this is also what you're getting. And this one isn't as prevalent as you'll get in other episodes, but the criminal wants to help Columbo solve this case. Franklin doesn't go out of his way, but all of those little tutorials that he gives to Columbo, that's really going to turn into something as far as like, here, let me help you figure this out, Lieutenant. Whatever I can do, I'll answer
so like
any
the
questions.
Misdirections.
Oh yeah, all those misdirections that he's given him.
That was the other thing that I noticed in this episode that they didn't do in the other one, at least not as much, was when Columbo is talking to Jim Ferris, the guy who gets murdered, his wife, he's like, this is how I'm going to catch him. This is what I need from you. That really wasn't there in the last 2 episodes. It was like Columbo was operating off screen. And then anytime he needed to do something, he would appear on screen. It was weird to see him talking to another character, not in like Columbo mode.
Yeah, he was much more of a person.
Is that going to become more common?
I don't think so. No, if anything, you will probably go away from that a little bit. And he's very much more of a closed book around other people. So this is kind of unusual, the way that he talks to Rosemary Forsyth.
Yeah, he's like being very open and honest with her. He's like, here's what I need. This is what I need from you. And I was just thinking to myself, like, they didn't do this in the last 2 episodes. It's a very different, because the way that they portray Columbo in those scenes is not the way he's portrayed elsewhere.
When he knows that somebody is innocent, he will kind of take them by the hand a little bit, and he will actually reassure people a lot of times, like, I know you didn't do this. But he doesn't necessarily ever say that to the criminals. He will just do like, oh yeah, that's very interesting. You know, just some of that stuff. He never comes out and says, well, of course you didn't do this. He just follows along, plays along, lets them let out enough rope, as they say, to hang themselves. And they are more than willing to just keep stringing that along, thinking that they're just fooling this idiot, but yeah, they're just digging themselves deeper and deeper until he's there putting the dirt in the hole.
This episode with Jack Cassidy doing that, I think, has been the most successful so far, where he's like, well, I'm a mystery writer, and if I were solving this, and it's like, dude, I know that you think you've got Columbo, but Columbo has you by the short hairs, and you just don't know it yet. here's a list of people that they might have been, and, well, they probably, someone from Miami or New York, just a professional, just came and killed him, and Columbo's like, oh, yeah, well, we'll look into it. It's like, we're not going to look into any of that shit, so we ain't looking into that at all.
This idea of mystery writers or even later on a TV detective that Columbo is up against. I mean, it comes back.
I was expecting that. I was expecting a little meta.
That is probably one of my most favorite episodes, especially because he goes up against Bill Shatner.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
he goes up against Shatner twice. And the first time, though, is probably one of the best times ever.
Oh, no. There's something on the way.
And Walter Koenig makes a small appearance in that. Well, of course, it's a small appearance, but...
If Shatner's there and someone else from the show is there, your time is at least half, if not 1/4. Speaking of the villain again, I hadn't seen Jack Cassidy in a lot of things. I mean, that has to do with an age thing on my hand. But also, he passed away pretty early on.
Yeah.
Jack Cassidy passing away at age 49. He passes away in 76. 5 years after this. I mean, it's more of a shame than anything else. Because he's very much a stage actor. He received multiple Tony Awards, as well as nominations, and a Grammy. So, he's a stage actor, but man, he just brings it here.
Yeah, oh God, yes he does. Yeah, it's kind of weird he was eclipsed by his sons between David and Sean Cassidy, because they were the heartthrobs when I was growing up. I never really saw it, but then I wasn't a teenage girl.
Well, hey, and you know what? One half of the Cassidy brothers are still alive. I haven't really watched a whole lot of their stuff, but I know one of them was in the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys thing, right?
Right, yeah. That was Sean.
As one of the Hardy brothers.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting connection.
Yeah. And Cassidy was actually married to Shirley Jones, and the whole Partridge Family show was kind of loosely based upon that whole idea, because it was David Cassidy was the son of Shirley Jones, as well as all the other, kids that were in there, Susan Day and Danny Bonaducci and a couple other people. But I really didn't watch that one too much when I was a kid. So it was just like slightly too old for me. I was more Brady Bunch than Partridge Family.
Again, I haven't seen a lot of Partridge Family either, but I know of its cultural impact.
Oh, there you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I know who Danny Bonaducci is.
Oh, God,
yes. That's his fault. That's of his own doing, not mine.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Celebrity boxing featuring Monica Lewinsky versus Danny Bonaducci. All right. Well, or Pauly Shore versus Danny Bonaducci. That's probably more, maybe Dustin Diamond. That's probably what it would have been.
Oh, God, those two. Yeah.
I love the 70s. Danny Bonaducci will pop in for a couple talking head segments like,
well, when it was me, I was getting pussy like nobody's business more than a toilet seat.
Yeah, it's like, okay, bro, you were like 10. But Jack Cassidy's really good here. The smarm that he brings is just unlimited amounts of smarm.
And yeah, you'll like him in the other roles that he plays, especially he plays a magician in one episode. And he's not the Great Santini, I don't think, because I think that's the movie, but he's fantastic. I mean, he, like I said, he's one of Columbo's best villains. And then next month when we talk, we're going to be talking about another one of Columbo's best villains, which is Robert Culp, who showed up, I think, 2 other times, and at least one other. He's going to be pretty good. Talk about a different tone, though. That whole smarmy thing that Cassidy is doing, it's more like seething anger when it comes to Culp.
What's funny about this show is, unlike other whodunits, and even like a lot of the books that I've been reading, like, you get the characterization of the person who commits the crime in secret because you don't know it's them. And so when, in the last 5 pages or last page or chapter or whatever it is, depending on the book that I end reading or whatever book is being written, I'm always like, I would like to know more about the villain because like their motivation is inherently very interesting. And then you come to Columbo and it's like, well, here you go.
And what's nice is that the motivation here is really well drawn. I mean, and it's not just handed to you right from the get-go. Like, you think these two are partners, and it isn't until we get more into the investigation that, like, Ferris's wife starts to really dish, and then you learn more and more just what a fake Jack Cassidy's character was.
Taking advantage of his very successful, very talented friend.
Yeah, and apparently the joke on the set was which one is Levinson and which one is Link.
Not a joke, however, Barbara Colby seemingly also the victim of an actual murder? Unsolved murder, too, of all things. Man.
I think there should be some sort of true crime podcast about that, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Barbara Colby's unsolved murder. Yeah. It would end up happening 4 years after this one. So, after this episode. She's really good in this, too. Her role is, again, I actually wanted more of her character just to give her a little bit more of a presence with Jack Cassidy. So it felt a little less like, oh, they have a history, but it's being essentially presented all off screen for the most part. But I wanted more of her character. And I frankly could have taken more of Rosemary Forsyth as well. I could have used a little bit more of that. But again, we're operating inside of a little bit more, clearly a little bit more narrow. The restrictions have narrowed a little bit. It's a little less time. It's about 20 minutes less. They're really having to make sure they're hitting on all cylinders throughout, because they're not going to be given 1 or 2 minutes to waste, frankly.
You're going to notice, too, as we get into some of the later seasons, runtimes change, and they'll even change in a season. They'll like decide kind of a little, not last moment, but farther along in the game than you would think that they would. They'll say, oh, well, let's have this fill a 2-hour slot instead of an hour and a half. And it's just like, what? How can you do this? And there's one episode with Cassavetes where we'll definitely talk about how they ended up filling extra time just to pad out that episode.
Yeah, oh my god, it's all over the place. Huh. That's weird.
Rosemary Forsyth, I mostly know her by her voice more than her face. And I think I mostly know her, of all things, and I'm almost ashamed to say this, she was, I believe, the judge in Ghosts of Mars.
Wow.
Yeah.
What bag did you draw that out of?
My wife watches that movie a lot.
Help me. I'm being held captive. Why?
I don't know. I guess I would be watching Assault on Precinct 13 a lot, and I don't know. Maybe it's Jason Statham. Maybe it's Ice Cube. I don't know. It's the same damn story as Assault on Precinct 13, but just in space.
I'll need to rewatch it. I haven't seen it in a long time. I don't remember liking it, but
it's not very good.
Most late John Carpenter movies aren't. Most post 90s John Carpenter stuff. A lot of the 90s stuff. There are some good things like In the Mouth of Madness, but then there's also Memoirs of an Invisible Man and Escape from L.A., which is, I guess, it's okay. Village of the Damned, on the other hand.
Oh God.
Oh Jesus. Hey, look, Escape from L.A. is still mildly entertaining. At least it's somewhat defensible there, but yeah, no. Ghosts of Mars, huh? Rosemary Forsyth in Ghosts of Mars. That is a deep pull. Elbow in the bag. She's great. With a show where it is devoted essentially to the villain the entire time, you do know what you're getting, but I did feel like I wanted a little bit more interaction with a couple more side characters, because the last two, there were some. There was I guess in the last one, there was that daughter character who had a lot to do, almost too much. And then in the first one...
Well, eventually becomes the woman that Gene Barry was trying to run away with. And you also, in one version, you had the DA character. I guess actually it was 2 versions. They had that DA.
For me, that's the only kind of like minor quibble here, but man, 99% of the way there, this is a really fun episode and a really good episode. Just a good episode of television, a good mystery story that you can take in a little over an hour, and then you can go on the rest of your day and do something else. And it's a nice, it's like sitting down and reading a 200-page book. By the end of it, you feel like you've gotten an entire story, but it didn't take up too much of your time, and you can go watch another episode if you want, or you can go do something else. But it's not 2 hours, and it's got that pace is just perfect. That Bochco writing is perfect.
Well, the one last thing I want to say is that the music for this is really interesting too, especially that Billy Goldenberg took those typewriter keys and worked that into the music. I thought that was really nice. So that like as they're playing the music, it worked very well.
Yeah, I agree. I also like we've kind of talked about the visuals, obviously, with Spielberg being this very much in charge of the camera, very much this person who knows what he's doing with the camera. But the quality of, like, I don't know, something about the look is even better. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like the quality of the set design. I think I don't know, the show is finally getting into feeling like it's making some substantive decisions about the kind of show it wants to be and sticking to them. And I like that. And I appreciate that, because again, like these first two episodes, it was a little like, where's it going? We're going to test out a couple things, see what we think works. But here it's like, we know exactly what we want. We know the story that we're telling. We can be a little tongue in cheek, but at the same time, you're here for a really well written story with Peter Falk at the center of it. And it succeeds immensely.
So let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to play an interview with Joseph McBride, the author of Steven Spielberg, a biography, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Have you ever wanted to dive deeper into the horror movies you love? Beyond the Blood is a horror podcast for fans who want more than just surface-level screams. We do deep dives into the movies that shaped us, digging into director commentaries, behind-the-scenes stories, deleted scenes, and the special features that most people skip. Each episode is a love letter to the genre. We break down how these films were made, the creative risks that paid off or didn't, and the lasting impact they've had on the genre as a whole. From 70s slashers to modern nightmares, we celebrate the craft, chaos, and characters that keep us coming back. If you're the kind of fan who rewatches movies with the commentary on, or you simply grew up in the video store horror aisle, the Beyond the Blood podcast was made for you. New episodes every single week. Subscribe, and let's dig deep. Welcome to the Beyond the Blood podcast.
Hello, this is Aaron West. I am the author of the A24 New Wave. In this book, I look at A24's output, and I make the argument that we are in a new wave movement right now. A24 plays a major role. This book has a supplemental podcast where each episode is a brief conversation about an A24-related topic, whether an actor, director, or even a genre. As I continue research for the book and conduct interviews, I expect to record podcast episodes with people involved with the company. You can find the podcast at cinejourneys.com or wherever you find podcasts, and we are proud to be members of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
In the past, we have talked about several filmmakers that you've written about that really run the gamut, but most of them are, well, let's put it this way, dead. I'm very curious as far as how you decided to write about Steven Spielberg.
Well, I have a new book out on two living filmmakers, the Coen brothers, The Whole Darn Human Comedy, Life According to the Coen brothers. So I'm I go back and forth between the classic directors and the current directors. And Spielberg, I always thought was the best of his generation of American filmmakers, and he still is. Back in the 90s, when I was starting to think of this book, well, actually, I should backtrack. As far back as 1982, I began thinking there should be a biography of Spielberg, and that's when he became very famous with E.T., but I thought he's only 35. That's too young to write a biography. And I hadn't done an actual biography before. I did a short biography of Kirk Douglas, but my first real in-depth biography I started in 1984, which was Frank Capra, The Catastrophes of Success. And then I was working for many years on a John Ford biography, which came to fruition in 2001. In the 90s, I began thinking, well, Spielberg still hasn't had a really good biography done on him. There was a short one by Tony Crowley, which was fairly good, but it was sort of sketchy. He didn't do a lot of research, and that was about it. And there wasn't even a good critical study of Spielberg, which was kind of shocking to me, considering what a great filmmaker he is. And Crowley's biography, like all the other biographies of Spielberg, with one exception in mind, just rely on quotes from him, from published interviews, and a few quotes from other people that, talked about him. But nobody had done the actual shoe leather research, knocking on doors, ringing doorbells, making phone calls. I decided that it was high time to do this guy. What finally tipped me over the edge was Schindler's List. When he decided to go ahead with Schindler's List, that was a watershed for him, because he had been hesitating for quite a long time about doing this very difficult project, very personal. He was very conflicted about his Jewish background when he was a kid. He was born in a Jewish neighborhood in Cincinnati called Avondale, and his parents lived across the street from the local synagogue, and so he was in a kind of cocoon-like environment there. But then they moved progressively to more and more waspish suburbs in New Jersey and Arizona, and then Saratoga, California, Northern California. And each time it became more difficult for him, because there were fewer and fewer Jewish kids, and he felt more and more of an outsider. And that was part of what drove him to be a popular artist and filmmaker. I think he's a great popular artist, because he wanted to appeal to the widest possible audience, and he wanted to be liked. He wanted to get approval, which is quite often why people become popular artists. At a certain point, he kind of lost that need, because he got so much approval in terms of popularity. He didn't need any more of that, but he wasn't getting approval from reviewers and from the Academy and from his peers in Hollywood, who looked down on him as kind of a schlocky, popular entertainer. And it's very similar to what happened with Hitchcock in his prime. It's hard to remember now, because Hitchcock is enshrined in the Pantheon. There have been more than 50 books about him, but back in the 50s, when Stephen was, well, I'll give a specific instance. When he was in high school in Saratoga in 64 or 65, he had a friend named Gene Ward Smith, and Stephen and Gene Ward Smith would meet in the library, because Gene was a brilliant mathematician. He was so far beyond the other kids that they let him just go off in the library and do his own thing. And Stephen was kind of a misfit in school. He was not a good student. He wasn't paying attention. He later found out, much later, he had dyslexia, which was the root of his problem. So he wound up a lot in the library with Gene Smith. So they started talking a lot. And Gene is a very bright fellow, and I interviewed him, a really interesting man. They talked about movies, and Stephen said, "I call Hitchcock the master." And Gene said, this really floored me, because back then, he said, I read publications like the Saturday Review, which looked down on Hitchcock, and nobody was calling him the master. And also, I thought, this high school kid is using terms like that. I mean, he's very precocious. And he said, I think of Spielberg, when I interviewed Gene, he said, I think of Spielberg today as in the same position Hitchcock was in back then. He was beloved by the public and had a certain respect from his peers, because he was such a great technician, but he was not taken seriously by short-sighted American reviewers. And that's why Truffaut did the Hitchcock interview book. When he came to America to promote Jules and Jim, he was shocked at how people looked down on Hitchcock. And so he did that book primarily to show people Hitchcock was a great director. So I wanted to do the Spielberg book partly for that reason. And also, I thought it was a really good story. I'm an old journalist, and I smelled a good story there, because Stephen was an amateur filmmaker, and I know you want to talk about his early work, which fascinates me. I always loved tracing the roots of how people become who they are and how filmmakers and creative people form their personalities. And so Steven was a brilliant amateur filmmaker for a long time before he became a professional. And I'll go back one more time before we get moving along on that. Back in, I think it was 1971 was the first time I heard about Spielberg. I read a little item in Variety about this really young guy directing television in Hollywood. And that was very unusual. There weren't guys that young directing anything in Hollywood at the time. The youth revolution was just beginning, but he was really young. He was, well, in 1971, he would have been 25, the same age as Orson Welles when Welles made Kane. And I was in Hollywood in 1971 to work on Welles's The Other Side of the Wind, which I'm an actor in. And I sort of thought it'd be fun to look up this guy, Steven Spielberg, and interview him. But I just didn't have time. I was so busy and I didn't do that. And then I went back to Wisconsin and I saw my first Spielberg directed show, which was a TV movie called Something Evil in January of 72. And I was really knocked out by the opening of that film. It's a horror film. It has a tremendous opening. The visual style is so kind of avant-garde and extremely sophisticated. I thought, well, here is a director who really has something. And I wonder what it would have been like if I'd interviewed him way back then. But I followed his career as it went along, and I was very fascinated by him. Till the 90s, people didn't take him seriously. There's a new critical study of Spielberg. Actually, it's an updated version by Lester Friedman, who wrote a book called Citizen Spielberg, and he just came out with an updated version, bringing it, all the recent films. And he thanked me for lighting the path for the rest of the people to follow, which I thought was very nice. And Nigel Morris did a fine critical study of Spielberg, and he called me the godfather of Spielberg studies because I was really alone. I don't mind being alone. I like being alone. I like being out of step with the times. I kind of helped make him respectable in sort of serious film buff circles. And what I'm really glad about is a lot of younger reviewers, and the reviewers started taking him seriously when he made Schindler's List, and he got a lot of acclaim, but there were still pockets of resistance. But a lot of young people are studying his work, and more books keep coming out, and I'm really pleased by that.
Well, how did you go about studying those early days, and especially some of those shorts? Because I know some of them are pretty much impossible to find.
Well, he started directing films in 1957, which means he's been making films for 65 years, which is a long career, longer than John Ford's career. He call him the last of the silent filmmakers because he had to start without sound for years, and that's good discipline. People like Hawks, Hitchcock, Capra, Ford, they started in silence, so they developed a visual vocabulary, and then when they got into sound, it was easy for them to make that transition. The same happened with Steven. There were scattered references to some of his early films. He's given a lot of interviews, and he's a very good interview subject. He's very introspective and thoughtful. But it was a scattered list of stuff. What I decided to do, since I only do unauthorized biographies, because authorized biographies are compromised by definition, I interviewed 100 people before I approached Spielberg's office. And I wrote to Marvin Levy, who was his longtime publicist, a very real gentleman, nice fellow. And I said, I'd like to interview Steven. I'm doing this book for Simon & Schuster. And he wrote back and called me, and he said, Steven knows your work and he respects you, but he doesn't want to cooperate with any biographer because he's saving it for his autobiography. That was the line that he keeps using. But he said he will not interfere with your book, and he proved to be true to that. One of the things he did was when people called his office to say, should we talk to Joe McBride, they were told I was kosher, which I thought was very nice. But he did tell his mother not to talk to me. I called his mother, who's a wonderful lady, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, I've been told not to talk to you. And I said, by whom? And she said, the gods told me not to talk to you. And I said, Stephen, chuckled. And I did get to his father. Nobody had interviewed his father. His mother was a real character, and she was actually even on the Tonight Show once, and she was interviewed a lot. So I got a lot of quotes from her. But I guess your mother knows the really bad stories about you, like what kind of crap you have under your bed, and literally, and he had the parakeets in his room, for example. But the father, Arnold, was a remarkable man. And one thing I was learning in my research, all these people who had worked on the amateur films were still around. And that's one of the advantages of doing a book about a current filmmaker, because I would have loved to have talked to Frank Capra's parents, for example, but they were long gone when I came along. But with Spielberg, all the kids were there. They're grown people now, but several of them, we've been waiting 30 years for somebody to ring the doorbell or call us and say, can we talk about your work with Steven Spielberg? So they were thrilled to talk about it. And I talked to his school teachers, and I talked to his babysitters and his neighbors and his Boy Scout leader, and, really a wide range of people, 327 people. But anyway, so when Marvin Levy said, Steven won't give you an interview, I said, could I ask some questions in writing that he might answer? And he said, sure, send them along. So I just sent one question as a kind of a test. I said, will you give me a list of your amateur films? Because there's no such thing in the literature. And I never heard back. So I had to put it together myself, and did it by interviewing all these kids and digging up. There is some written evidence of his amateur films too. And as you say, most of them can't be seen. Once in a while, he lets bits and pieces out for documentaries, and he keeps a lot of them. Apparently, he has a lot. Alan Davio, the late cameraman who did E.T. and other films, Empire of the Sun, told me he was the custodian of Spielberg's film library. So Steven does have a film library, but I've been lobbying for years for him to put these things out on a DVD or Blu-ray set. That would be wonderful. And the title would be Steve Spielberg's Home Movies, which was the title of a 1960 show that he did for his grade school Halloween carnival. They had little tents. Kids were doing displays, and he showed his home movies in this thing. Steve Spielberg's Home Movies would be a great set. So we can talk about those films. And they led gradually to Amblin, which is his first professional film, and that gave him his contract at Universal, and he did TV for a few years before he did features. But he made films for 11 years before he made professional films. And by the time he made Amblin, he was an extremely polished filmmaker. He was 21 years old. He often tells the story because it's very cute. The first film he saw was The Greatest Show on Earth, the Cecil B. DeMille film, which has a big train wreck. It's kind of an awful film, but it has a spectacular train wreck. And Steven was very impressed by that. And he had toy trains like we all did as a kid. And one reason I like doing this book is I'm about the same age as him. So I had all the same hobbies and obsessions, and cultural influences pretty similar. But he would crash his toy trains because he was kind of a rowdy kid, and he would like to have crashes. And his father got really mad and said, if you keep doing that, I'll take away your train. So Steven very cleverly, very important fact I learned from these kids. One kid said, I actively liked Mr. Spielberg. And Steven in interviews was putting his father down at that time. He would say, my father opposed me a lot when I was a kid because I wasn't a good student, and he wanted me to be a scientist. His father was a computer pioneer. He had a lot of patents. He was a brilliant man. Died at 102 just recently. But Mr. Spielberg was an amateur filmmaker going back to the 1930s, and he tinkered with radio before that, and I was a technical genius. So he was making home movies, and so Steven worked with his dad for a while. It was sort of a father-son hobby, I learned. And so he gave all the credit to his mother, who was a very creative person, a concert pianist and a real free spirit. But his father was the one who got him interested in movies. And one of the kids who was in one of the Spielberg amateur films, which was actually one of his later amateur films, said, I wasn't sure who was really directing Mr. Spielberg or Steven, or Steve, they called him back then, or Stevie. So, Arnold had a lot to do with those films. And there's pictures of Steven shooting Firelight, his first feature in 63, 64. And Arnold is right there with him and helped build miniatures. And, they had a lot. It was a fun hobby for the two of them. And gradually, Steven took over the use of the camera because he thought his father's camera work was pretty square. So he started doing more elaborate things. But he filmed his two train cars crashing together so he could play the film over and over again. It was very clever. And he learned about instinctively cutting in the camera, just cut from one going left to right, the other going right to left, and boom, they crashed. And that way he could keep watching the train wreck without his father taking the set away from him. So that was called The Last Train Wreck. Then he made a movie called The Last Gunfight. It's interesting. He uses the title The Last for his first two films. He made a kind of a Western spoof at a restaurant in Phoenix where they had a stagecoach outside. It was kind of a Western themed restaurant and kind of a goofy film, apparently. And then he did a film called A Day in the Life of Thunder. They had a dog named Thunder. And he did a lot of experiments. What he did was he hooked up a wagon And he had a harness attached to the dog, and the camera was in the wagon, and he just told the dog to run around the neighborhood and film his day in his life. It was a very clever idea. He did other Westerns. He did comedies. Then he got a little more ambitious. He did one called Fighter Squad, which was a World War II flying picture. Back in the day, you could buy 8mm little films at the camera store, which were either Hollywood films or newsreels. And so he bought some aviation stunt action films from World War II. And there was a World War II airplane at the Phoenix airport, and he talked them into letting him shoot there with his friends. And he would do tilts of the camera and stuff to make it look like it was moving. And a great story I heard. Now, Stephen was bullied a lot in school, partly for being Jewish and partly for being skinny and wimpy, as he called himself. And kids would push his head into the toilet and, terrible stuff like that. But he did a very clever thing. The way he coped with it was to put these kids in his movies so he could boss them around. And the guy who was the worst bully, apparently, who pushed his head in the toilet a lot, he made into a Nazi in his war movies. And another kid told me, who was a jock at the school, he heard that Stephen was making this film at the airport on Saturday and come on out. And he went there out of curiosity. And he said, it was amazing. He said this nerd was directing this film, like really with great authority. He said it was like a nerd playing the piano like Van Cliburn, is a memorable phrase. Stephen's dad told me Steve was a charming young man, that he would go to the airport, and for Firelight, he needed a big commercial airplane. And he went in there and talked them into letting him shoot a scene on the tarmac when a big plane came in. He had a character in his film dressed in a suit, wearing a briefcase, playing a scientist, going up the ramp into the plane. He had the plane for 10 minutes. And they let him do it, because his kid was so charming. And Arnold made the point of saying, I didn't have anything to do with that. Steve did that on his own. And then he made an ambitious film. He had a teacher named Patricia Scott, who was his 8th grade teacher, who was very encouraging. And they had a 8th grade session of what you're going to do for a living, get up and talk about what you want to do for a living. And Stephen said, could I make a movie? And she said, sure. He said, I want to be a filmmaker. And she said, okay. That was very nice. And the principal, she said, objected to this, but went to bat for him, So in everybody's life who's a creative person, there are a few people like that who really stood up for you. A lot of teachers didn't understand him. The 5th grade teacher told me Stephen wasn't paying attention. He was reading American Cinematographer magazine under his desk and not paying attention. I could relate to that because I was really bored in school too. But anyway, Patricia Scott let him make a Western for her class, and she said the students just really loved it. And then he made an ambitious war film called Escape to Nowhere, which was shot from 1959 to 62. It's kind of a David Lean epic. He was getting into Lawrence of Arabia and the bridge on the River Kwai. And on Camelback Mountain, which is a very picturesque mountain in Phoenix, and they have sort of desert-like terrain that they could shoot in. That was his favorite location. He did this World War II film, and his mother played a German soldier with a little helmet over her blonde hair, and they had a family Jeep that he used. And one of the kids said, Stephen pulled up on the Saturday in a pickup truck with a machine gun. And the other kids were saying, wow, how does Stephen get a machine gun? And he said, I was just thinking, how does Stephen get a pickup truck? So he was doing this war movie, and you can see snippets of this in documentaries. And just to give an example of one clever thing he did to simulate explosions, he and his father worked out a thing where they would dig a little ditch, and they would have a wooden plank, and they'd have a bag full of flour, and a kid would jump on the plank, and the flour would go flying up. It would look pretty authentic on film, like an explosion. And he started getting some attention on local TV. They had him on. Somebody told me they saw him on TV showing a part of a sci-fi movie he made. And another thing he did that I was impressed, he got a widescreen lens somehow for his 8mm camera, and he made a widescreen film noir in 1960. But his chef d'oeuvre in high school was Firelight. He made a big feature film in high school in Phoenix. Extremely ambitious 2-hour and 15-minute science fiction film. It's kind of a precursor to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I got the script from the leading lady of the film, whose name is Beth Weber Zielinski. And the 2 stars of the film both quit after 2 weeks. They didn't realize that this is hard work to make a film. But he did all kinds of special effects. He and his father worked out special effects of aliens visiting the Earth and stuff. And all the snippets I've seen look terrific. And Alan Davio said, what he could do with some Jell-O and some cardboard on a kitchen table was pretty amazing. But unfortunately, I guess this is the story that Steven, when he went to Hollywood, loaned the film to some producer who didn't return it. Can you imagine? I mean, I always tell people, always have a copy of everything, But I don't know how much of Firelight he has, but it's a shame. It was shown once in public at a little theater in Phoenix the night before the Spielbergs moved to California. And it made a profit because it cost $500 and it grossed $600. And so then he goes to Saratoga, and one thing he did, he made a film called Senior Sneak Day, which was the high school graduating class of Saratoga High. They would go to the boardwalk at Santa Cruz, which is kind of like Coney Island, and goof around in the sand. And his new movie, The Fabelmans, which is coming out in November, I'm not quite sure what that's exactly about. It's supposed to be semi-autobiographical, but characters' names have been changed. And everybody assumed it's about his Phoenix days, but I'm wondering if it has more to do with the Saratoga period or maybe both periods, because some stills emerged on the internet of the kid who plays Steven. He looks like a dorky kid, and he's shooting on the beach with a bunch of jocks and good-looking girls and stuff. And that's kind of what Steven did back in the day. Then he goes to Cal State Long Beach. He was rejected by USC and UCLA because his grades were poor, but he made a couple 16mm films there. He tried to do a feature called Slipstream, which was about bicycle racing, and parts of that exist, but it had to be called off because there was a big rainstorm. He'd rented a crane, and he kind of made the mistake of putting a lot of his money into this one-day shoot, and it rained, and he had to abandon the film. But it was beautifully shot. There was a film called Citizen Steve that his wife, Amy Irving, did for his 40th birthday celebration, which is actually his 41st because he lied about his age. And I exposed that in my book. But anyway, in Citizen Steve, there are clips from Slipstream, which looks beautifully shot. It looks kind of like the bicycle stuff in E.T. And then he made Amblin, which was Chuck Silvers was the librarian at Universal, the film librarian, was his mentor. Wonderful guy. And when Steven tells a false story about breaking into movies, directors all have what I call creation myths, creation stories about how they're such a genius, they just walk in and become whatever, great director. And he claimed that he walked in wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, walked through the gate at Universal and set up an office, empty office. That's just bullshit. Actually, Chuck Silvers had Steven as an unpaid intern in the summer of '64. And what Steven's story is covering up is that he had a family connection to Universal. His father knew the guy who was head of computers at Universal. That's usually the way you get into films especially back then. He didn't have an office of his own. I asked Julie Raymond, who was Chuck Silver's assistant, about Steven's office, and she said, well, it's a lot of horse shit. And Chuck Silvers more diplomatically said, well, let's say I've never been in that office. Julie said Steven sat in a chair next to her desk, and she would give him a lot of paperwork, and he would run around the lot and go to the Technicolor lab on the lot and run errands and stuff. And that gave him entree to the lot. And he would go on sets and watch people shoot TV shows. He became friendly with John Cassavetes on one of the shows. Cassavetes said to him, he took a shine to the kid, and he said, tell me how you would want me to act the next scene, So Steven would kind of direct Cassavetes, and Cassavetes made him a production assistant on Faces. He got thrown off Hitchcock's set for Torn Curtain. Hitchcock wouldn't let him watch. But he would meet people like Charlton Heston and Rock Hudson and Cary Grant walking around the streets, and he would say, could I have lunch with you? And they all said, sure, he's such a charming kid. And so he got to know all these people, and that's his real entree. But Chuck Silvers said, nobody's going to look at these films you're making until you make a 35mm film. Chuck looked at them, and he said it was like looking at the work of a young Leonardo da Vinci. He recognized the genius of this kid because he saw Firelight and other films. But he said they don't look at 8mm, they don't look at 16. You got to make a film in 35. And he said that summer of '68, Bobby Kennedy was shot, and they were having to remove violent scenes from a lot of TV shows. He was very busy. He said, leave me alone until you come back with a 35mm film. And through Julie Raymond, he met a guy named Dennis Hoffman, who was a young would-be producer who had a little production studio in Hollywood where they made commercials and things. And he also was a manager of a rock band called October Country. And he wanted to make a film, and he had a little money. So they hooked up and they made Amblin for $20,000. And it was a beautiful 26-minute film, really sophisticated camera work and editing. And Alan Davio shot it, gorgeous photography. And it's a very moving love story, very Truffaut-like. Truffaut was his favorite director at the time. He finished it and showed it to Chuck Silvers, who showed it to all the older film editors around there. And he said all these old guys were crying. They thought it was the perfect motion picture, they called it. And so then Silvers told me, he said, what can I do for this kid to help him? And he thought, well, maybe you should start in TV. Sid Sheinberg was the head of TV at the time. And every night at 9 o'clock, he'd watch Rushes. So Chuck went and gave the projectionist Amblin. He said, put this on at the end of the Rushes without telling Sid. And so the next morning, Chuck came in and there were 8 phone messages from Sheinberg. Who is Steven Spielberg? Where is Steven Spielberg? Get me Steven Spielberg. Have Steven Spielberg call me. So Chuck called him and said he was in town with his cousins. And he said, Sid Sheinberg is a very formal guy. He calls everybody sir, so call him sir and wear a sport coat and a tie and be very polite and get over here this afternoon. So Sheinberg has him in the office and said, sir, what do you want to do? And Steven says, I want to direct films. And Sheinberg said, I was very impressed with, the maturity of this film and also the choice of actors. I thought that was an interesting comment. And the handling of actors. I think Steven's greatest talent he has many great talents, but the one that gets the least attention is how good an actor's director he is. But Sheinberg picked up on that right away. And he said, I'd like to offer you a 7-year contract to direct television. And Steven said, well, I'm a junior at Cal State Long Beach, and Sheinberg said, sir, do you want to direct films or do you want to be a college student? And Steven said, sir, I want to direct films. So he dropped out of school, signed the contract, and the rest is history. He later went back and got his degree, finished his degree as a kind of a example for his kids. But anyway, that's how he got into television. That's a long story, but that's quite a saga. He didn't just kind of show up and walk in the door. He paid a long apprenticeship to get there.
What were those early shows like? He has such a really great visual style. We just watched an episode of Night Gallery, the Eyes episode, and then what he does in Columbo is just remarkable. What were some of those other television works like?
Well, I've seen almost all of them. The only 2 that I haven't been able to see are his 2 psychiatrist episodes, a series called The Psychiatrist. I've seen part of one. The one that he likes the best of his episodic work was Par for the Course. It was a psychiatrist episode about a golfer who's dying of cancer, played by the remarkable actor Clu Gallagher. And Joan Darling is in it, who's a wonderful actress, and this was one of her landmark performances. She later became a director, too. But parts of it were folded into it was actually a home video feature called The Visionary that was released. You can find copies of that floating around. But it's intercut with another show. It's kind of a hodgepodge. And I don't know what happened to this, why this has not been released, but I read recently that they may have lost it. It's sad. I think there should be a box set also of all of his TV work, Let's see it out on DVD or Blu-ray. Some of it is available. The Night Gallery stuff has come out. He did Eyes, and then he did another one called Make Me Laugh. And he did the Columbo is out on a Columbo said Murder by the Book. Richard Levinson and William Link were the producers and writers. That was their favorite episode of Columbo. And it wasn't the first one they shot, but it was the first one that aired because they liked it so much. And Bill Link told me partly it was because it was about 2 writers. One writer discovers the other guy's a killer. And it's a very sophisticated, very black comedy kind of show with a terrific performance by Jack Cassidy. Then he did an Owen Marshall, which I've seen that's very good. And some of these shows he was constrained. He did a Marcus Welby, Owen Marshall. Those didn't give him a lot of leeway to show off. He got in trouble on Eyes because he was doing some sort of avant-garde shooting techniques, and the producer was not sympathetic. And so they kind of took it away from him and recut it. And that producer told me they had some trouble cutting the operation sequence, and they had to play some games with the editing. And he didn't work for a while after that, but Sheinberg, it got known around the studio. I interviewed a lot of the TV people there that he was Sheinberg's protege, and Sid was pushing him for jobs. He didn't order people to use Spielberg, but he was always saying, why don't you look at his work? And so he got to Marcus Welby. He did a good job. And that's kind of a personal story. It's about a kid who's a hemophiliac in high school, played by a fellow Frank Webb, who was a student at Stevens High School in Arizona, actually. And it's pretty good. It's not, as flamboyant as Eyes, but he was trying to show that he could do a professional, more, routine kind of job, but it's pretty good. Then Make Me Laugh was the Night Gallery show that he got taken off of. Janos Schwark reshot parts of it, so it's kind of a hybrid. Godfrey Cambridge stars in it. Stephen has made a number of films with black leading actors, which is interesting. And then he did a very interesting film called LA 2017, which is his first feature-length film in Hollywood, actually, 1971. People say Duel was his first, or Sugarland Express, but LA 2017 was 74 minutes long, and it's science fiction dystopian film about LA is so polluted that they had special camera effects to make the air look weird colors and stuff, and people live underground in tunnels. It's a pretty good film. They should have released that again in 2017. I don't know why they didn't do that. That's the Name of the Game episode. And then he did the 2 psychiatrist shows and Murder by the Book, and all this led up to Duel, because Stephen was getting restive in television, and Mike Medavoy was his agent, and he told me that TV was really important to Stephen in his development. And I said, why? And he said, well, because it led to Jaws. It helped him establish credibility that at first, Eyes, everybody probably has heard the story. He's directing Joan Crawford, and she stood up for him. And actually, Betty Davis balked. She was the first actress cast in that show, and she heard that how old would he have been? 22-year-old kid was going to direct her. 23, 22, a little unclear when. It would have been 22. She said, I'm not going to work with a 22-year-old director. That was really bizarre at the time. And so they fired Betty Davis. Shows you how much Sheinberg cared about Spielberg, and they got Crawford to do it. And she was behind him. She thought at first this is kind of weird, but hey, he's a smart kid. And Chuck Silver said, when you go to see Miss Crawford, quickly study up on her films. So he got Lawrence Quirk's book of the films of Joan Crawford and quickly boned up on her work and mentioned some films he had seen, and she was impressed, and she was a real pro, and she helped him get through it. But the crews were really not nice to him. They were older guys back in the day. I remember I got to Hollywood in 73, and everybody was old. That's one reason I thought Spielberg was remarkable. And I interviewed Ron Howard too in the early 70s, and did the first interview with him as a director, and he was a very unusual young director too. But most of the crew guys were old guys, and they had been, you couldn't get a job unless you were the son of a cameraman or something. And these guys were sneering at Stephen. And Russell Meddy, the great cinematographer who did Touch of Evil and a lot of Douglas Sirk films, he shot the Columbo episode, and he called Stephen the kid in a disparaging way. But Bill Link said, well, Russ Meddy referred to Orson Welles as the kid, too. Meddy had worked on Citizen Kane, some of the reshoots, and Ambersons, and The Stranger and Touch of Evil. He was very full of himself, great cameraman, won an Oscar for Spartacus. But he would make jokes like, when is the diaper truck going to arrive on the set? That's not really a good atmosphere for a young director. So Stephen would be very anxious. He's a very anxious guy anyway, but you can imagine what it took to get through that kind of thing. But Bill Link and Levinson were very much on his side. Link told me one time, Meddy called him to the set. He didn't want to shoot a setup Spielberg had because he wanted to shoot through some glass paneling. And Meddy thought it would cause reflections or something and had to order Meddy to do it Stephen's way, and it worked out fine. And there was another story I heard. It was that show. Stephen had a very complex setup plan where camera would move around. He likes to do multiple shots in one. He says, I like to get 3 or 4 shots in one setup. So he had a scene like that. And I don't want to mention the actor's name. It wasn't Jack Cassidy, but at 9 o'clock in the morning, the actor showed up totally drunk on the set and couldn't do the scene in one take, And Stephen called Link down to the set and said, got to replace this actor. And he said, we can't, you'd think at Universal they could run out in the street and get some other actor, but I guess they couldn't. He said, you just got to make do. This is what happens in television. The schedule is remorseless. So Stephen had to break it up into a whole series of shots to make it work. It's in the film, but that's the kind of stuff he had to cope with as a TV commercial contract director.
How did he and Falk get along together?
I worked with Falk on the AFI Salute to Frank Capra. He was a wonderful guy to work with. I at least found him really delightful, and we collaborated on his speech. We did a segment where we were honoring Capra's work with character actors. He was really wonderful with small part actors, and he said, I treat every actor like a star, which was wonderful, and made all those little parts come alive. And Peter Falk's performance in otherwise terrible film Pocketful of Miracles is really the only good thing in the film, and it helped make Falk a star. And so he and I got along great, but I've heard some stories that he and Spielberg didn't quite get along. I'm not sure the truth about that. Link indicated to me that Falk could be somewhat difficult, but I guess when you're a star of a TV series, you have a lot of power and a lot of say over who's directing what. And on the other hand, I talked to Curtis Harrington about Robert Blake, who had a bad reputation on TV. And he said, I directed him on TV and he was just great. He was just terrific to work with. And, some people just didn't understand him or how to work with him. And said, I have nothing bad to say about him. So, I tend to reserve judgment until I know more directly. But I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't get to Peter Falk on the book.
What was Bill Link like to talk with?
Oh, he was a wonderful guy. He was a very erudite fellow. And he and Levinson were great TV writers. They did fantastic socially conscious TV movies about, they did a film on a gay theme, for example, on TV. There was a breakthrough TV movie. And the Columbo series is a classic, one of the greatest TV series ever done. They were such brilliant writers and producers. And they did a show, a TV movie called The Gun, which is kind of forgotten. John Badham directed that. And it's gun control film, but it's sort of soft sell. What it does, it starts out with a piece of metal going along an assembly line, and you see it under the credits being turned into a gun, a handgun, and then it gets sold to somebody, and it goes from hand to hand, kind of like Tales of Manhattan or the Yellow Rolls Royce, that kind of plot. And there's a whole bunch of people in the film keep wondering, when's the gun going to go off? Because as Chekhov said, if you show a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the last act. And it winds up finally with a father puts the handgun in his closet, and a little boy finds it, and he's playing with the gun, and he turns the gun toward him. And it's, if I remember correctly, it's sort of a Hitchcockian shot, like in Spellbound, where the gun barrel is pointing at the camera, and then you just hear an explosion, it goes to black, and that's the end of the film. Really good film, So that's Levinson and Link. Some of the best people on TV. And they were really behind Steven, like some of the more sophisticated people on TV understood this guy. The man who produced Duel was really remarkable, producer George Eckstein. He really was supportive of Steven. For example, the studio wanted to shoot it with process screens, which would have ruined the film. One of the things that makes Duel so good is it's shot out on a real highway with a real car and a real truck. And the same thing happened when Jaws came along. There was pressure on Steven to shoot it in a tank at Universal, and that would have ruined the film. Steven believed and fought for it, and Sheinberg backed him up that you got to shoot it on a real ocean. And he said you can't see any other boats on the horizon because it would ruin the story, because if you see other boats, then what's the danger, But they had great trouble shooting because little boats would appear in the background. It takes a long time to clear the horizon, and sometimes people would do that on purpose so they could extort money from the production. And numerous times people wanted Sheinberg to call Spielberg back from location and force him to either cancel the film or do it a different way. And Sheinberg flew to Martha's Vineyard at one point and sat down with Steven. It was going wildly out of control. The shark famously didn't work, and all kinds of problems. The crew was mutinous, and actors were very unhappy. And Sheinberg said, what do you think, Steven? I could cancel this film right now, and I don't blame you for it. And Steven said, no, I want to finish it. And Sheinberg said, go ahead. I interviewed Bill Gilmore, who was the production manager on Jaws, and he said it was the most difficult shoot in the history of motion pictures. Of course, there have been a few others like Cleopatra, but Jaws was just a horrendously difficult shoot. And some of the difficulties were glossed over in other accounts, but I really I don't pull punches in my research. I report what really happened. To give an example, the shark wasn't working, and then they got the shark kind of working, but that's what made the film good, as everybody now agrees, that you don't see the shark very much. It's suggested. It's like a Val Lewton film where you don't see the menace. But there had to be a shot at the end of the film where the shark jumps up on the boat and kills Robert Shaw. And it is one moment in the film that's sort of hokey. It's Grand Guignol and it's bloody and it's sort of fake looking, but had to happen. But when they did the shot, Gilmore said the shark kind of was inching along the water line and just sort of rose a little bit and sort of plopped onto the boat. He said it looked like a limp dick, is what he said. And Stephen was going crazy, and he said, hey, what's going on here? And this is the big money shot of the film. And they found out that the guy who had designed the shark, to save $12,000, had put in a less powerful motor than they had planned, I guess. And so the shark could not rise majestically and fall onto the boat. Stephen was freaking out. He was like screaming, and all the pent up frustration was coming out. And Bill Gilmore ordered him, this is what a production manager has to do. He said, you're going to shoot this scene. This is the best we're ever going to get. And they did it. And then they had to kind of cut around it. But it was terribly frustrating. But on Duel, they closed off a whole stretch of highway and shot this for real. But the editor told me, Frank Morris, he said, if you look at the film really carefully, using a lot of the same stretches of highway over and over again, but from different camera angles, Stephen did it really well, so you couldn't tell. But the truck had to be going fast, and the car had to be going fast. And Kerry Lofton was the truck driver. He was an old, grizzled stuntman who worked on many films. And he told me, he said, I didn't see anything really interesting about that film. Come on, Frank. Kerry, this is a great film. He said, I don't know, it's just another movie to me. And at the end of the film, when the truck is going off the cliff in that famous shot, Lofton said he was preoccupied because he had to get to Disney World the next day to do some stunt or something. And he was not paying attention. He had to rig the brakes so it would jam just in time for him to jump out of the side of the truck and clear it before the camera could see him doing that. And he sort of got stuck or something, or it was a little hairy, and he just jumped off right at the last moment before the camera could see him, and also before he'd go over the cliff. And then they told me that they shot it with 5 cameras, and they were sitting in the projection room and screaming, get out of the shot, get out of the shot. And they had just like 3 seconds of clear footage of the truck going over the cliff, and it worked. And then there's this big explosion, and Stephen mixed in the sound of the creature from the Black Lagoon dying. And Joan Darling, who's a great actress, told me that Stephen had the idea of having her come in and scream, and they would distort it electronically. She did a lot of screaming, and they were going to mix that with the creature from the Black Lagoon, but they wound up just using the creature. She, by the way, she's a wonderful director who doesn't get ever mentioned. When they talk about pioneering women directors in Hollywood, I've taught a class on that at San Francisco State, and they talk about Elaine May, who was the only woman directing features for a while. But Joan Darling directed a feature called First Love in the 70s, and I interviewed her Variety about that. And she also directed the famous Mary Tyler Moore episode, Chuckles Bites the Dust. Wonderful kind of serial comedy about death. It was a remarkable show, and she's a brilliant actress, brilliant person. But she's in Par for the Course, and she's the wife of the dying golfer. And she has a scene in which she has to get on the phone after her husband dies and call her mother and tell her the guy died. And Stephen shot it from a distance. And this is I've seen this because it's in the Visionary show. You can see her kind of at the phone booth, and she kind of crumples into the booth and she starts talking. And she told me that Stephen is such a sensitive director of actors that all he said to her was, when JFK died, Jackie Kennedy, and then she interrupted him. She said, don't tell me anymore. I've got it. That dignity and stoicism that Jackie Kennedy had. She understood that without him explaining it, and she didn't want to hear anymore. So she had that until that moment where she just sort of crumpled, and it was a great moment. And Chuck Silvers told me that one of his colleagues said, you got to get down to the set today and watch Stephen shooting. And he said, I've seen Stephen shooting. The guy said, no, this is really special. And he watched that scene being shot. He said, Stephen, how do you know about death? Really young guy. How do you know about death? And portray it so well, the guy dying in the hospital room with his wife there. And Stephen said, well, my grandfather was in a hospital or nursing home for about a year before he died, and I would go there and sit with him quietly in his room and just watch him. And that's how I learned about death, So we tend to forget these things. Another guy, one of the young actors who was in one of the TV shows, later became a director, told me, what a great actor's director Steven is. He said, any director can get a great performance of Al Pacino, but only Steven Spielberg can get a great performance out of a rubber puppet.
How many editions of the Spielberg bio have been out so far?
There have been 3. There was 1997, then I updated the book in 2012, and then I did another update in 2013. That's only available in England from Faber and Faber. It goes up to the pre-production of Lincoln. That's as far as I got. And for whatever reason, and I forget the particulars, but the University Press of Mississippi edition is only the second edition of the book, the one that's available in America. Most people don't know there's a third edition. But I kept adding on and adding on. And when you do a book about a living artist, you have to keep adding to it. I've been planning for a number of years to do another big chunk of addition to the book. And I think when The Fabelmans come out is a good time to do that because it's sort of a watershed. He's turning 75. Let's see, he was born in 1946. He used to claim he was born in 47, but I found out he was born in 46. That's the whole story in itself. But he's 75 already. He'll be 76 right after The Fabelmans comes out. That seems to be a watershed because that's an autobiographical film. It's maybe his 400 blows, we hope. And it's a good time to take stock of his career. And let's hope he goes on for a long, long time after that.
Well, tell me a little bit more about this Coen Brothers book and what else have you been up to lately?
Well, I've been really busy the last couple of years. I did 4 books that just came out. I did a critical study of Billy Wilder, another favorite director of mine, Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge from Columbia University Press, which came out in October. It's about a 600-page book, and he had such a long, vast, wonderful career as a writer and director. And started in Germany, and then he worked in France, then he came to Hollywood, and then in his later years when he was kind of having trouble getting films made in Hollywood, he started going back to Europe and making films like Avanti and Fedora, etc., Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which I think are some of his best films. And I've been writing about those films since they came out. I was a champion of his late work when it was happening, when he was being shunned. He was known as a, quote, cynical director, and I challenged that in my book. I think he was what his writing partner, I.A.L. Diamond, called a disappointed romantic. His films are full of passion and emotion and empathy, but he's a very hard-boiled realist at the same time. So they're an interesting mixture of those two attitudes. And he was a journalist in Vienna and Berlin before he became a screenwriter, so I trace all that work too, and the influence, and I think of him as a kind of a journalist doing exposés on film. And I follow this track all through his career. He was a great social critic and satirist. And then I did a new edition of my book, Whatever Happened to Orson Welles, A Portrait of an Independent Career. That was a book that came out in 2006 from the University Press of Kentucky, and I did a new epilogue, came out in January, this new edition with The Other Side of the Wind, the film that I'm in, which about a third of the book is about the making of that and the attempts to get it finished. And I spent years trying to help raise money for it and get it finished. And finally it got finished in 2018. And I was a consultant on that with Jonathan Rosenbaum. And I write about, okay, what is this film? How does it all come together? And then I also write about his early film, Too Much Johnson, which was fortuitously discovered in a warehouse in Italy, which is amazing. The odd films turn up in the oddest places. We never thought we'd see this film. It's a remarkably good silent slapstick comedy film he made. He was going to show parts of it in a stage production of this venerable old farce, Too Much Johnson, by William Gillette. And for a variety of reasons, they never finished the film and didn't show the footage. He put on the show in Summer Theater, never made it to Broadway, and the film disappeared. And then it somehow made its way to a warehouse in Pordenone, Italy, and the guy who owned the warehouse was going to junk the film because it started stinking. It was, nitrate film deteriorates. He called a guy in a local film club called Cinema Zero. Mario Cotto was the guy's name. He said, "Do you want this film?" And the guy looked at it and he thought, maybe this might be an Orson Welles film. And so he gave it to him. And then, unfortunately, Mario Cotto died before the film was totally preserved and released. He never quite knew for sure he discovered a Wells film, but it was authenticated, and the Bologna Archive and George Eastman House Museum in America and the Film Foundation preserves it. You can see it online, and you can see Other Side of the Wind on Netflix continually. I'm really thrilled for Wells that he had the biggest audience he ever has had, because Netflix goes to like 180 countries or whatever it is, and it's playing 24 hours a day in different languages, and it's just wonderful that it's out. And then I did this book on the Coen brothers. I should say, before the Wells book came out in December, I had a book that I've been working on for a long time called Political Truth, the Media and the Assassination of President Kennedy, which is a follow-up to my 2013 book, Into the Nightmare, My Search for the Killers of President John F. Kennedy and Officer J.D. Tippit. And I've been researching the media since I'm a journalist from way back, been studying the case and how the media have lied to us about it, the mainstream media, all these years, and maintained the government cover-up. The media are kind of like a branch of the government. So it's the alternative media and podcasts like yours, radio shows. The internet has been a great help in giving alternative views, and books are more free than newspapers. And so I write quite an ambitious book. I think it's actually my most important book I've done because it's a really big theme. It's really studied all the material, and I write about films, and I write about TV shows, and I write about all kinds of different media. And part of the theme is how a lot of people have lost faith in what the government says. And when I was a kid, you may remember, actually believe the government pretty much. When President Eisenhower was caught lying about the U-2 flights, we were really shocked. President lies? I mean, presidents had lied before, but we were naive. Now, if the president tells the truth, it's a shock usually. But we trace the disillusion usually back to the Vietnam War and all the lies about that. But the Kennedy assassination preceded that, and I think that's where this problem really started. And it helped lead to the Vietnam War, because Johnson reversed Kennedy's policies secretly right after the assassination. And then it led to Watergate and all kinds of things. And then the ultimate, so far, conclusion is January 6th, the assault on the Capitol, the attempted coup by Trump and his minions. But people were shocked. A coup could happen here? Well, we had one in 1963. And so I think part of the reason these things happen is people won't face the truth about our history, and that's the theme of the book. And Mark Lane, who was one of the early critics of the Warren Commission, said the honor of France was restored when they admitted that Captain Dreyfus was innocent. And he said the honor of the United States will not be restored until we admit that Lee Harvey Oswald was innocent. So this book came out in December, Political Truth, Media and the Assassination of President Kennedy. Then I did a book on the Coen brothers. So I've done 4 books they all came out in a short time, but the Coen brothers book is called The Whole Darn Human Comedy, Life According to the Coen brothers. And those who love The Big Lebowski, as I do and you do, will recognize The Whole Darn Human Comedy as a phrase that Sam Elliott's character, the stranger, says in his introduction as he's giving the folksy narration. And I love the Coen brothers, and I usually write books about filmmakers who are misunderstood or underappreciated. Now, they've had a lot of acclaim. They've won Oscars and prizes. A lot of critics love them. They have a lot of fans, but there's a lot of misunderstanding of them, like there was a Billy Wilder. People think they're misanthropes or cynics or nihilists or whatever, and I think they're the sons of Billy Wilder is what I'd call them. They're disappointed romantics, not as romantic as Billy Wilder was, but they had call them more like disillusioned idealists, actually. In their films, you can sense a bedrock of values and idealism underlies it, like with the Tommy Lee Jones character in No Country for Old Men, as a lawman, a man of integrity and rectitude who just can't cope with craziness, the modern world, and the evil that we deal with. And the same with Marge Gunderson in Fargo. The Frances McDormand character is a similar character, a very admirable law woman who is trying to keep the peace, and it's very difficult because there are these serial killers running around and crazy people. So I analyze the Coens, and what I do is I take the objections people have made to their work, and then I try to answer them systematically. I think that's a good strategy. And then I did a lot of this book in 2017. I did a book called Two Cheers for Hollywood, which is a collection of my short pieces. and I wanted to add some new things. And I did a monograph-size piece on the Coen brothers then, and I decided to watch all their films in a 2-week period out of order deliberately, just to kind of get a sense of their themes. I'm a little tired of the strict chronological approach. It's a little restrictive in some ways. So I wrote this piece, and then I thought it worked really well. It was a lot of fun to do, but I thought I'd spin it off into a book to get more attention for it as a standalone thing. And then Anthem Press in England asked me to do a book, and I said, how about a book on the Coen brothers? And I'll add a chapter on the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is a wonderful film they made for Netflix, which is a compendium of their work. It's 6 stories, Western stories, the whole range of their styles, from extreme absurdist farce to very serious drama and fantasy and everything in between. And it turned out, because they're not working together right now, they've temporarily gone separate ways. Just, Joel Coen did the Tragedy of Macbeth, and Ethan is working on plays. So it's a good time to take stock of them. They're only in their mid-60s, so I hope that they will make more films, and I don't know what will happen with them. I don't think they know. They apparently have a number of scripts that haven't been filmed that might get filmed, and maybe they'll work together. But Joel said, when we started making films together, we didn't expect we'd be making films as a brother team for all those years. That wasn't their game plan. Just because you have a brother who makes films doesn't mean you have to be a brother team, So I've done that book, taking stock of them. And it is fun doing a book like Spielberg or the Coen brothers in their prime, or in their, it's certainly the prime of both filmmakers in terms of the Coen brothers, and Spielberg did that in the 90s. And he's done a lot of tremendous work since then. And it's kind of challenged because the critical ideas about these people have not firmed up yet, like they have about Hitchcock. David Thompson just did a piece for Sight and Sound attacking The Godfather. That's what you have to do now to get attention, attack some film that's considered a classic. But I like to just boldly go where nobody's gone before, which I kind of did with Spielberg. The Coens have had other books written on them, but again, none that I feel is really totally satisfactory. There's a workman-like biography of them, but we don't know a lot about them as people, and they don't give very informative interviews on purpose. And I actually admire that. I talk about this in the book, that John Ford, who is my favorite director, I interviewed, my first Hollywood interview was with John Ford, who was the most difficult person to interview. He basically just figured, I'm not going to tell people what I think. All his career, he pretended to be an illiterate cowboy, as he said. He told that to Hedda Hopper. He said, don't let this get around. I pose as an illiterate cowboy. But he wanted people to form their own opinions about his films. He didn't want to tell you what to think. And now I really respect that. Back then I was kind of confused. But I think that too many critics and reviewers take their cues from what the filmmakers say about their works. And Kubrick told Spielberg some years ago, he said, never tell the press or the media what your intention is in making a film, because that's all they will say about it. And they won't have an interesting discourse. And, don't let them pin you down. The only time Spielberg has violated that was when he made Munich. I think he felt, since it was such a fraught political topic, he better really put out a statement of what he really intended. And he gave a long interview to Time magazine before it came out. And the film was still misunderstood because, it's all about the Middle Eastern situation. So people are, it's a very contentious subject, but he at least gave his views, take it or leave it, what think. But normally he gives a lot of interviews. He's very colorful, very vivid, and very self-scrutinizing, introspective kind of person, but he doesn't tell you exactly. Well, I guess with West Side Story, he and Tony Kushner did sort of expound a bit on some of their views of ethnicity and things, but he doesn't do a lot of that. I mean, he leaves it up to us.
Professor McBride, thank you so much. It is always so nice talking with you.
Thank you, Mike. It's great talking with you. It's always just a delight, and you know so much. It's fun to share ideas.
Are you a film fan who loves the ultimate home video experience? Look no further than The Disconnected. Your host, Ryan Verrill, is your go-to source for the latest and most accurate information on home video releases, exclusive interviews with industry insiders and filmmakers, and has established a thriving community where every film and physical media enthusiast feels welcome. From hidden gems to blockbuster hits, The Disconnected brings you insider knowledge and a welcoming space to share your love of cinema. Watch every Thursday night at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific for the live announcements show and follow The Disconnected on social media to stay updated. Subscribe to The Disconnected on YouTube or on the podcast provider of your choice and dive into a world where every movie night is an adventure.
All right, we are back and we are talking about Murder by the Book. And Chris, I am so excited to talk with you again next month as we talk about Death Lends a Hand. So you get even more of this good early Columbo.
Also, I do want to point out the titles of these are just pitch perfect. Like these pitch perfect titles like Death Lends a Hand, Dead Weight, Suitable for Framing. Like it's, again, they Lincoln Levinson, and that as the showrunners right now, the most probably as most involved as they're ever going to be right here at the get-go. They know exactly the kind of story that they want. And I love that. I love that this is this singular vision. It's so oddly specific that you can't help but applaud them being like, you know what, a whodunit's no fun, but a how catch 'em? And like really leaning into it and just being like, you know, this show's called Columbo, but he's in it for like 20 minutes. It's so fucking smart. And I know I know it can't persist all the way to 2003. And it's not constant until then. This isn't Doctor Who. But right now, this first episode, it's just, I watch the show and I go, why haven't I been watching this?
Yeah, when Columbo regenerates in season 12, that gets really weird.
I would watch that. I don't want to go yet. No, Columbo, no. Don't cast my Columbo as a woman. How dare you? God.
But then, plot twist, they did. It's Kate Mulgrew.
Oh my, you're right. Are we going to have to talk about that at some point?
Probably.
Boy. It's a question everybody wants to know. We always do our due diligence with these shows. We covered Kolchak Reboot, which I think, for the most part, the community would have given two shits less if we hadn't. They couldn't have cared less if we hadn't approached it.
I have dug up some Mrs. Columbos, which, by the way, had 3 name changes while it was on the air for a very short period of time. Yeah, I think it started as Mrs. Columbo, and then I think it was, oh God, I can't remember what the second one was, but it ended up as Kate Loves the Mystery.
Kate Columbo, Kate the Detective. And also Mrs. Columbo.
Good stuff. Not really. No.
No. I can't even imagine it's good if it ran for so few episodes. So few seasons.
I think I have dug up maybe 4 episodes overall. I lost that hard drive, so I guess I'll have to start digging again and see what I can find.
I don't think they've ever released the entire show. I think they've released
I don't think they have.
Actually. They released it in France in 2014.
Oh, is it dubbed in French?
Madame Columbo, 5-disc set. Uh-oh. What have we done? The thing with his wife, obviously I have no frame of reference yet where that ends up going. From what I can tell and what I've read, his wife is just mentioned, but she never shows up. And I also know that from that Burt Ward thing that we watched, where it was like his wife is here. Isn't that weird? Like we're seeing his wife and they always like make a joke about it. But yeah, I guess we'll have to cover it somehow if we're able to find it. If you out there in Radioland know where we can find it.
The other thing too that I meant to bring up earlier that I was very surprised about is, does Columbo say that his wife is a fan of the Mrs. Melville novels?
I don't think so.
See, that's a surprise. because almost always as we go forward, I've never read them, but my wife, she swears by these. They are some of her Can I get an autograph for my wife? So there's a lot of that happening. He swoons over a lot of people, and that's one of those tactics, making the person feel really good. I always loved your movies, or any of those kind of things. But yeah, his wife is such a big fan of so many people.
And you know what? Like, I love Kate Mulgrew, which is the unfortunate part, that it seems like it was probably really bad, or just misintentioned. I don't think anybody was like, let's make a show about Mrs. Columbo. Let's make sure that it runs for 2 seasons, when Columbo ran for 10. Nobody wants that. But it is weird because, like, his wife, again, that movie we've watched and everything that I've picked up from the conversations we have, his wife's never going to show up in this show. And he never shows up in that show.
No, Peter Falk said it was disgraceful.
You're a disgrace! An animal!
He wasn't too happy that they ended up doing this because, and I can understand why. You're taking my character, creating this abomination. I don't think that Lincoln Levinson had anything to do with this either. I think it was just like the studio was like, we own this property. We can do whatever the hell we want.
Yeah, you guys sold it to us. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be fair, Lincoln Levinson are going to cash those checks anyways, so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, money's green.
Apparently, at some point in the show, she does divorce Columbo.
I know a lot of nerds talk about canon and stuff. Mrs. Columbo is not canon to me.
Sure, I don't see how it could be, given that even when she gets divorced from Columbo. So what's the point of the show then? You're no longer Mrs. Columbo.
Kate loves a mystery.
She sure does, folks. So do Mike and Chris. That's why we're doing this show.
So, Chris, what is happening in your world, sir?
So this month at my main show, The Culture Cast, we're talking about one of my favorite kinds of films, Indian cinema. Everything's 3 hours. And then everybody complains until they watch it and they go, this is really good, though. And I'm like, stop complaining, then. Stop bringing up the same complaint every year that the movies are long until you watch them and you enjoy them. And it's like, why don't we watch more of these? It's like, because they're 3 hours long and you don't like watching 3-hour movies. So that's what we're watching over at my main show. And then, like Mike mentioned, we do some other shows, Dreams for Sale, Barney Miller.
Eventually, we'll talk about more Steven Spielberg when the Night Gallery show comes out.
Right, Rankin on Bass. No Spielberg there, no Peter Falk there, no connection there, I don't think. Find 6 degrees of Peter Falk somehow.
Richard might do some bad Peter Falk impersonations. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's where you can find me, and cstasher.com is my link tree. What about you, Mike? What's going on over at the internet's best movie podcast?
Well, over at How This Got Made, over at the projection booth, we are actually talking about screwball comedies this month. And we're going to have Joe McBride back on a few of those shows as we discuss some Frank Capra, some Howard Hawks. We're going to be talking about My Man Godfrey, The Awful Truth. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things to check out. And we're going to have Kat Ellinger on every single one of those because she's a huge screwball comedy fan. And it's going to be great to get her opinions on these. And it's going to be nice to laugh because we're not going to have a whole lot of laughs in May when we talk about Soviet cinema.
Boy, you picked a real bad year to do that, my friend. Comrade Mike? Da, 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 da. No, it's fine. Hey, it's just like when we did those pandemic movies or, Soviet. You stop picking every time you pick Soviet movies as a theme, you might just be careful that it may bring into reality the thing that we're talking about.
Originally, we're calling it Russian Month, but actually it is more related to the post-Soviet states. So there will be some. Hopefully, we might even talk about some Ukrainian cinema.
I wasn't invited on for that.
No, not at all. Yeah,
plunge that heart, that saber right through my Cossack heart.
Until like 2 months ago, who even knew that Ukraine existed?
Right.
It was what? There's a country called Ukraine.
Right,
I don't know what this
who
is.
Knew?
Yeah.
Now everybody's now you're the expert. Let me tell you about Eastern European country lines and how they were drawn.
I was an expert in pandemic diseases.
Now I'm an expert in Eastern European geopolitics. Uh-huh.
Yes, of course. Well, until we speak next time, I appreciate everybody for listening. I really appreciate Colin Gallagher for doing our end theme and John Walker for doing our intro theme. And I appreciate everybody who has gone over to iTunes and left a rating or review. Maybe all 2 of you. So get on over there, folks, and do that. It helps people notice that there's another Columbo podcast on the block, and we are not kidding around.
There are a lot of them, folks.